The Ideal of Human Unity. Chapter 30. The Principle of Free Confederation. The issues of the original Russian idea of a confederation of free, self-determining nationalities were greatly complicated by the transitory phenomenon of a revolution which has sought, like the French Revolution before it, to transform immediately and without easy intermediate stages the whole basis not only of government, but of society, and has, moreover, been carried out under pressure of a disastrous war. This double situation led inevitably to an unexampled anarchy, and incidentally, through the forceful domination of an extreme party which represented the ideas of the revolution in their most uncompromising and violent form. The Bolshevik despotism corresponds in this respect to the Jacobin despotism of the French Reign of Terror. The latter lasted long enough to secure its work, which was to effect violently and irrevocably the transition from the post-feudal system of society to the first middle-class basis of democratic development. The Laborite despotism in Russia, the rule of the Soviets, fixing its hold and lasting long enough, could effect the transition of society to a second and more advanced basis of the same, or even to a still farther development. But we are concerned only with the effect on the ideal of free nationality. On this point, all Russia, except the small reactionary party, was from the first agreed. But the resort to the principle of government by force brought in a contradictory element which endangered its sound effectuation even in Russia itself, and therefore weakened the force which it might have had in the immediate future of the world development. Footnote: the component states of Sovietic Russia are allowed a certain cultural, linguistic, and other autonomy, but the rest is illusory, as they are in fact governed by the force of a highly centralized autocracy in Moscow. End footnote. For it stands on a moral principle which belongs to the future, while government of other nations by force belongs to the past and present, and is radically inconsistent with the founding of the New World Arrangement on the basis of free choice and free status. It must therefore be considered in itself apart from any application now received, which must necessarily be curbed and imperfect. The political arrangement of the world hitherto has rested on an almost entirely physical and vital, that is to say, a geographical, commercial, political, and military basis. Both the nation idea and the state idea have been built and have worked on this foundation. The first unity aimed at has been a geographical, commercial, political, and military union, and in establishing this unity, The earlier vital principle of race, on which the clan and tribe were founded, has been everywhere overridden. It is true that nationhood still founds itself largely on the idea of race. But this is in the nature of a fiction. It covers the historical fact of a fusion of many races and attributes a natural motive to a historical and geographical association. Nationhood founds itself partly on this association, partly on others which accentuate it: common interests, community of language, community of culture, and all these in unison have evolved a psychological idea, a psychological unity which finds expression in the idea of nationalism. But the nation idea and the state idea do not everywhere coincide, and in most cases the former has been overridden by the latter, and always on the same physical and vital grounds of geographical, economic, political, and military necessity or convenience. In the conflict between the two, force, as in all vital and physical struggle, must always be the final arbiter. But the new principle proposed, footnote, and this principle was recognized in theory by the Allies under the name of self-determination, but needless to say, it has been disregarded as soon as the cry had served its turn. End footnote. That of the right of every natural grouping, which feels its own separateness to choose its own status and partnerships, makes a clean sweep of these vital and physical grounds, and substitutes a purely psychological principle of free will and free choice as against the claims of political and economic necessity. Or rather, the vital and physical grounds of grouping are only to be held valid when they receive this psychological sanction and are to found themselves upon it. How the two rival principles work out can be seen by the example of Russia itself, which is now prominently before our eyes. Russia has never been a nation-state in the pure sense of the word, like France, Spain, Italy, Great Britain, or modern Germany. It has been a congeries of nations: Great Russia, Ruthenian Ukraine, White Russia, Lithuania, Poland, Siberia, all Slavic, with a dash of Tatar and German blood. Courland, which is mostly Slav, but partly German. Finland, which has no community of any kind with the rest of Russia. And latterly, the Asiatic nations of Turkestan, all bound together by one bound only, the rule of the Tsar. The only psychological justification of such a union was the future possibility of fusion into a single nation with the Russian language as its instrument of culture, thought, and government. And it was this which the old Russian regime had in view. The only way to bring this about was by governmental force, the way that had been long attempted by England in Ireland, and was attempted by Germany in German Poland and Lorraine. The Austrian method of federation, employed with Hungary as a second partner, or of a pressure tempered by leniency, by concessions and by measures of administrative half-autonomy, might have been tried, but their success in Austria has been small. Federation has not as yet proved a successful principle, except between states and nations or sub-nations already disposed to unite by ties of common culture, a common past, or an already developed or developing sense of common nationhood. Such conditions existed in the American states and in Germany, and they exist in China and in India, but they have not existed in Austria or Russia. Or, if things and ideas had been ripe, instead of this attempt, there might have been an endeavor to found a free union of nations with the Tsar, as the symbol of a supranational idea and bond of unity. But for this, the movement of the world was not yet ready. Against an obstinate psychological resistance, the vital and physical motive of union could only resort to force, military, administrative, and political, which has succeeded often enough in the past. In Russia, it was probably on the way to a slow success, as far as the Slavic portions of the empire were concerned. In Finland, perhaps also in Poland, it would probably have failed much more irretrievably than the long reign of force failed in Ireland, partly because even a Russian or a German autocracy cannot apply perfectly and simply the large, thoroughgoing, and utterly brutal and predatory methods of a Cromwell or Elizabeth, partly because the resisting psychological factor of nationalism had become too self-conscious and capable of an organized passive resistance, or at least a passive force of survival. Footnote. This could no longer be said after the revival of medieval barbaric cruelty in Nazi Germany, one of the most striking recent developments of modern humanity. But this may be regarded, perhaps, as a temporary backsliding, though it sheds lurid lights on the still existing darker possibilities of human nature. End footnote. But if the psychological justification was deficient, or only in process of creation, the vital and physical case for a strictly united Russia, not excluding Finland, was overwhelming. The work of the Peters and Catherines was founded on a strong political, military, and economic necessity. From the political and military point of view, all these Slavic nations had everything to lose by disunion, because disunited they were each exposed, and they exposed each other to the oppressive contact of any powerful neighbor, Sweden, Turkey, Poland, while Poland was the hostile and powerful state, or Germany and Austria. The union of the Ukraine Cossacks with Russia was indeed brought about by mutual agreement as a measure of defense against Poland. Poland itself, once weakened, stood a better chance by being united with Russia than by standing helpless and alone between three large and powerful neighbors, and her total inclusion would certainly have been a better solution for her than the fatal partition between these three hungry powers. On the other hand, by union a state was created, so geographically compact, yet so large in bulk, numerous in population, well defended by natural conditions, and rich in potential resources, that, if it had been properly organized, it could not only have stood secure in itself, but dominated half Asia, as it already does, and half Europe, as it was once, even without proper organization and development, almost on the way to do, when it interfered as armed arbiter, here deliverer, there champion of oppression in Austro-Hungary and in the Balkans. Even the assimilation of Finland was justified from this point of view, for a free Finland would have left Russia geographically and economically incomplete, and beset and limited in her narrow Baltic outlet, while a Finland dominated by a strong Sweden or a powerful Germany would have been a standing military menace to the Russian capital and the Russian Empire. The inclusion of Finland, on the contrary, made Russia secure, at ease, and powerful at this vital point. Nor, might it be argued, did Finland herself really lose, since, independent, she would be too small and weak to maintain herself against neighboring imperial aggressiveness, and must rely on the support of Russia. All these advantages have been destroyed, temporarily at least, by the centrifugal forces let loose by the revolution, and its principle of the free choice of nationalities. It is evident that these arguments, founded as they are on vital and physical necessity, and regardless of moral and psychological justification, might be carried very far. They would not only justify Austria's now past domination of Trieste and her Slavic territories, as they justified England's conquest and holding of Ireland against the continued resistance of the Irish people, but also extended a little farther Germany's scheme of pan-Germanism, and even her larger ideas of absorption and expansion. It could be extended to validate all that imperial expansion of the European nations, which has now no moral justification, and could only have been justified morally in the future by the creation of supranational psychological unities, for the vital and physical grounds always exist. Even the moral, at least the psychological and cultural justification of a unified Russian culture and life in process of creation could be extended, and the European claim to spread and universalize European civilization by annexation and governmental force presents, on its larger scale, a certain moral analogy. This, too, extended, might justify the pre-war German ideal of a sort of unification of the world under the aegis of German power and German culture. But, however liable to abuse by extension, vital necessity must be allowed a word in a world still dominated fundamentally by the law of force, however mitigated in its application, and by vital and physical necessity, so far, at least, as concerns natural geographical unities like Russia, the United Kingdom, even Austria, within its natural frontiers. 2 footnotes. Now we must say Great Britain and Ireland, for the United Kingdom exists no longer. 2nd footnote. Note from this point of view the disastrous economic results of the breaking up of the Austrian Empire in the small nations that have arisen in its place. End footnotes. The Russian principle belongs, in fact, to a possible future in which moral and psychological principles will have a real chance to dominate, and vital and physical necessities will have to suit themselves to them, instead of, as now, the other way round. It belongs to an arrangement of things that would be the exact reverse of the present international system. As things are at present, it has to struggle against difficulties which may well be insuperable. The Russians were much ridiculed and more vilified for their offer of a democratic peace founded on the free choice of nations, to autocratic and militarist Germany bent on expansion, like other empires, by dishonest diplomacy and by the sword. From the point of view of practical statesmanship, the ridicule was justified, for the offer ignored facts and forces, and founded itself on the power of the naked and unarmed idea. The Russians, thoroughgoing idealists, acted, in fact, in the same spirit as did once the French in their first fervor of their revolutionary enthusiasm. They offered their new principle of liberty and democratic peace to the world, not at first to Germany alone, in the hope that its moral beauty and truth and inspiration would compel acceptance, not by the governments, but by the peoples who would force the hands of their governments or overturn them if they opposed. Like the French revolutionists, they found that ours is still a world in which ideals can only be imposed if they have a preponderating vital and physical force in their hands or at their backs. The French Jacobins, with their ideal of Unitarian nationalism, were able to concentrate their energies and make their principle triumph for a time by force of arms against a hostile world. The Russian idealists found, in their attempt to effectuate their principle, that the principle itself was a source of weakness. They found themselves helpless against the hard-headed German cynicism, not because they were disorganized, for revolutionary France was also disorganized and overcame the difficulty, but because the dissolution of the old Russian fabric to which they had consented deprived them of the means of united and organized action. Nevertheless, their principle was a more advanced, because a moral principle, than the aggressive nationalism which was all the international result of the French Revolution. It has a greater meaning for the future, for it belongs to a future of free world union, in which precisely this principle of free self-determination must be either the preliminary movement or the main final result, to an arrangement of things in which the world will have done with war and force as the ultimate basis of national and international relations, and be ready to adopt free agreement as a substitute. If the idea could work itself out, even if only within the bounds of Russia, and arrive at some principle of common action, even at the cost of that aggressive force which national centralization can alone give, it would mean a new moral power in the world. Footnote: the idea was sincere at the time, but it has lost its significance because of the principle of revolutionary force on which Sovietism still rests. It would certainly not be accepted elsewhere, except in case of unexpected revolutions, without enormous reserves and qualifications. But it would be there, working as a power to make the world ready for itself, and when it is ready, would play a large determining part in the final arrangement of human unity. But even if it fails entirely in its present push for realization, it will still have its part to play in a better prepared future.